Today's podcast, we have the. This is a tough intro. We have the windswept look alike today. Andrei Lussmann, chef, proprietor of Lussmanns Sustainabilty Kitchens. He is a sustainable guru, award-winning, and multi-talented chef. Welcome, Andrei.
Morning, Callum. It is Andrei, not Andres.
Hey, listen, it's my show.
Can you speak English, please? Christ,
Scottish. Scottish, sorry.
Right. We're 3 minutes in and Scotland's already come up. I told you. Anyway, sorry, it's your show. Over to you, Callum.
It's not often Scotland comes at the top either, is it? To be honest.
Listen, unlike you, I believe in the British Isles. I'm a great supporter of the unity between these two old foes. And unless it's the Calcutta Cup, I always make sure Scotland comes second to England in anything, beyond English. We are, we believe in these islands, unlike you lot up there who want nothing to do with us.
Well, that's really nice to hear from a Swiss.
Anyway, come on. How much time do we need? How long have we got?
We've got as long as we need to be. Anyway, so first of all, I want to thank you for coming on here, because I was keen to get you on because I know we normally have top bants, but at the bottom of the bants, there's always a lot of purpose in the chat that we normally have. Sustainability is something that we've both been highly kind of productive in. It's a big key part of both our businesses, and I think you always speak really passionately, so I thought it was a great person to come on board and share your knowledge and your wealth and your journey, because it's just what I like people to hear, the journey, because it's not all plain sailing. It doesn't go to plan, but it's how you evolve and make things happen. So do you want to tell me about childhood? Tell me about where you were brought up and what your childhood was like.
Okay, I never ever talk about childhood and private life, but I will make a foray quickly. I got brought up in Africa. I suppose I was 2 weeks old, in the Ivory Coast, and then Nigeria following. And when we talk about going on holiday to different parts of the world, and you learn and you broaden your horizons and evolve your views beyond your own small community, there's nothing better than that. But actually there is, if you have the opportunity to live in a totally different country and immerse yourself in a world and a culture and a way of life and a religion that is alien to where you have come from. Now, thankfully, I spent my whole life there, so it wasn't so much alien, it was what I knew. And then when I came to school, clearly I was out of my depth, and I didn't understand on earth what was going on, because I spent most of my years in a very different world, so extremely different, amazingly different. And this was, we're talking about the 70s and 80s, so this was before the fundamentalist rise of ISIS, the arrival of Boko Haram, which is an Islamic fundamental group of a community essentially in northern Nigeria. So now it's not so safe. But when we lived there, you had a very strong Christian and Muslim communities living side by side, as is the case pretty much almost everywhere in the world, without issue. And I was privileged to see a different way, a different approach to life, and actually to remind myself how fortunate, in that typically middle-class way, but how lucky I am in terms of where I was born and who I am and what womb I popped out of. You sort of realise you've got no idea until it happens. And we are fortunate in Britain, for all the problems which we talk about, actually what we do have, and we never talk about the good stuff. There's so much more that unites us than tears us apart. So, that was my upbringing, in a very different world. And in doing so, I grew up with an Italian community, funny enough, because they were building big civil engineering projects funded by the World Bank. Clearly I wasn't. And that was, 10 years at a time, these projects. So growing up with the Italians is another experience, which is another day, you know, to talk about. I could write a book about the Italians, but I won't say anything today because I've already upset the Muslims, so we won't go on to the Italians.
And the Scots.
And the Scots. So we've only got 7 minutes in. And it's in the morning. I haven't had a drink, but no, you know, it was rich in a variety of reasons. So living the Italians, my father was Swiss, clearly the name Lussmann. Brought up in Africa, it meant that I had, you know, so much of an alternative perspective on how things are, and I suppose that sets you up beautifully for hospitality, which is this cradle, this wonderful coming together, uniting. You know, I don't think there's an industry quite like it that brings together different cultures, different ethnicities, sexual orientations. Everything is irrelevant. As long as you work hard, you're honest, you have a sense of humour, which, you know, I sort of think is really important. The rest of it doesn't matter. And it's a wonderful business that sort of, you know, has taken me from childhood until today.
So what would be your fondest food memory as a child? Because that will be totally different from where you were brought up. So what if you look back, what was a fond memory? Well,
one of my fondest memory was my gran quite often looked after me, you know, for certain weekends in the year when I was, you know, away at school. And one of my fondest memory was she would always want to take me away to, you know, an auntie or an uncle somewhere across the country, and I'd always say, no, look, let's just go home and let's just relax. So she introduced me to 3 things: to snooker, to lardy cakes, and to tea. But my fondest food memory, apart from the fact lardy cake and tea clearly is, was the fact that she would always say, "What was your favourite?" And I'd always have my favourite, which was Heinz ravioli, followed by a ski yogurt. And you know what? I just realised, you know, I've never actually recreated it, but I loved it so much. And you'd have that wonderful, that white doorstep bread, you know, with lots of butter, and it was delicious. And it was that's one of my fondest food memories, which actually has no relevance to the sort of food we try and do today. And I don't think Heinz is a superpower in the world of ethics and sustainability either. So yeah, that was that. I'm sure there'll be others that will come to mind.
So there's something for you now then. So there's a new lunchtime special menu, set menu put on at Lussmanns. It's going to create his own version of childhood memory.
But you know what? I had a board meeting the other day, and in Mayfair, and I dropped by a little place to have a quick half glass of red wine before I got on the train. And I had a little toasty, and it was a Lancashire and toasty, Lancashire cheese and toasty. I just thought it was delicious. And I always come back, Callum, that I think you can't get better than good bread, great butter, you know, red wine made, you know, simply, not aged too long. You know, the simple things in life, you know, actually, I feel are wonderful foray to probably what is deep-seated in our gut and our love and our passion for those sentimental moments when we look back at our upbringing. You know, simple food, you know, roast potatoes on a Sunday. You know, people often say, why don't we do roasts at Lussmanns? And I say, well, first of all, we're full on a Sunday without doing roasts. That's the first reason. But the second reason is actually we would be diverting into an area that I think it's very hard to recreate a great roast dinner that your gran used to do, or your granddad. I mean, I've got to make sure that we're not sexist. So a person of any sexual orientation or biological orientation was able to make for you as a kid. And, you know, and I think also, well, those those lunches you had with your grandmother, etc. If you can't make the roast potatoes as good as, then we shouldn't even bother. We shouldn't bother. We shouldn't try. And for 21 years, because we're 21 years old now, and we're going to celebrate after Christmas, because I forgot our 20th. So at least the 21st is a good time to celebrate. I thought, you know, we don't need to try and do things that we won't do as well as. And I think that's one of the reasons why customers come back, because they appreciate that what we do, which is more than a fish cake, you know, are very tasty and very ethical. But actually, most importantly, they bring people together across the table. You know, and that's the most important thing about what we do, is getting people to eat and to talk and to enjoy each other's company. Very old-fashioned it might be.
It's bringing smiles to faces food, isn't it? That's my memory. My memory, it's quite funny because like always going down to Nana's house, she always cooked. There wasn't a lot of money on the go, so you know it was like you got a slice of chicken, you got the leg, you know, you used to fight over the leg. Now my kids don't want the leg. It's like, I don't want the leg. Oh. But that's the memories. You don't hear much people turning around nowadays saying, what's your childhood memory? Going out for Sunday lunch every week. No, it's about bringing family together, isn't it? That's kind of memories that always kind of bring smiles to faces, you know?
Yeah, and the other day, we were talking about how foods change, you know, from the arrival of Bernie Inn's, well, not the arrival in the 60s, and of course I wasn't around, but they were big in the 60s and 70s. And I suddenly thought, well, I think the food revolution that's taken place in our lifetime since we've been working, or just before we started in the last 30 years, has been magnificent, you know. And I look back and when I went out, well, first of all, you just put your finger on it. You didn't go out. That's it. Tut sweet. If you went out on your grandmother's 70th, and you went to some posh hotel that had a Paris goblet, which, you know, is a very old-fashioned wine glass. You'd pick it up like you had, you know, you had the shakes because you were so worried whether you were allowed to touch the Paris goblet, and that was with orange juice in it. And then the carpet had piled up to your knees, the flock wallpaper. You had that awful tinsely music in the background, and everybody just sat there, not knowing where to look or what to do. And if it wasn't that, it was the pub. But then at the pub, I remember sitting in the garden or in the car, waiting with my packet of Smith's crisps and a little blue sachet of salt that you put on top. What a great innovation that was.
Salt and shakes.
Definitely ahead of its time. Imagine they brought that back today, they'd love it. And I remember sitting there, and we had a parrot called George. And I'd sit in the back, and I remember there's one occasion we had to give the parrot over to my uncle. So I'd sit there in the back with the parrot for about 3 hours. Now today, if you leave a parrot, let alone a human in the back of the car, within 10 minutes, someone's broken the car open and rescued the parrot and everybody in the car. But you know what? I think boredom is a wonderful feature because it allows the mind to wander and to think and to, you know, investigate and look at things. You know, we don't have enough time to stop and ponder, you know, and in light of that, it says here, recording continues smoothly. Good God, it's like Brexit all over again. Live video will return when the internet improves. Are you still there, Callum?
I'm still listening to you. Don't you worry about it. You just keep talking.
So, yeah, so, you know, food has changed since you and I have, I mean, we're almost the same age, I think. And it is, I mean, not everything's for the better, but generally speaking, you know, families eat out. And when we grew up, we didn't eat out. You sat round on Sunday lunch, and we all sat round with the family, and that was it.
What I was going to say when you mentioned salt and shake crisps there, what was it like when you found there was 2 salts inside the packet? It was like it was your birthday, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's so simple. It was exactly that. You felt as though you'd won the lottery. Not that you'd know what the lottery was then, but you know, I remember at school, you know, getting quite often I'd be banned from the film and sent, you know, to bed early because clearly at the age of 6 I went away to a boarding school, and I remember a number of times I used to go and buy food in which to sell it to the kids and make some money. You know, I had a regular business going on, and I used to go and buy Top Deck. And Top Deck, for those who don't remember, was basically a lemonade with 0.0001% beer in, which made it essentially an official shandy. And I would stand there in the shower like Peter Stringfellow, drinking these Top Decks, thinking I said, I don't need to watch Conan the Barbarian. You know, I'm drinking alcohol here, and I've got a bag full of money from all the money I've made today from these, you know, these fools next door. And I felt as though I had the big time. You know, it was only a Top Deck, but you know, those simple things were wonderful because you didn't need much to make you comforted by the fact that you'd had a successful day.
It's funny, Top Deck. That's a real nostalgic moment, that. But I went to buy some alcohol. Be careful, you're going to laugh. I went to buy some alcohol-free wine for Victoria the other week, and I went at checkout, and then it buzzed because I had to get like proof of who I was, like proof of age, and I'm like, it's got no alcohol in it. What are you going on about? It's just juice. But no. But you used to be able to go to the shop at any age and buy Top Deck. It's nuts, really, isn't it? How the world's changed.
Yes, and you're right. And most of the time, they have the screens that can verify who you are. And Callum, with the great respect, you look as though you're over 45. Okay, so you're definitely not 16. And it's like, you'd think with all the AI around, it would just say, this man is not an imposter. He's not a 16-year-old trying to look like a 50-year-old. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, yeah, so little wins, you know, from when we grew up. And we've lost those little wins, I fear.
Big time.
And food and drink was a great one because, you know, you went out with your parents or grandparents and you just didn't eat. This podcast all about food. You just didn't eat between one meal and the next. And I remember you got to dinner or lunch and you were starving. And you just ate everything and it was never enough. Whereas today, everywhere that we go, you know, whether I know the church does it, and I know that, you know, very smart retail stores do it. They got little coffee corners, they're giving out sweets, they're randomly providing people with sarnies at different times just to get them into the shops. And it's like, you know, it's too much. You know, I think we should just remember, you know, I think we'd be better off by eating proper at a meal rather than constantly eating in between. But anyway, that's another matter for another day.
So where does your love of food come from?
Well, you know, I grew up in a family, obviously abroad, and we lived with the Italians. So and we lived in, my earliest memories were living in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's all desert. And this firm that was a subsidiary of Fiat back in the early 70s, were building dams. Now, what they had there, they built a camp, a bit like Brookside, in the middle of the desert, for 1,000 Italians. And the 1,000 Italians arrived, men only. And then I think after a period of a year or so, the women and the families would arrive, you know. And they built these camps. And in this camp, there was essentially a swimming pool, you know, two. And there was a pizzeria, there was a mess, you know, for people, the staff to eat. And of course, my memory was two things really. One, there was a supermarket that was an Italian supermarket. So they would bring over by lorry, which is 1,500 kilometers from the south port of Lagos, up, you know, and the Lagos, obviously, it come by ship from Italy. You'd have, you know, lorries just full of Barilla pasta and Parmesan wheels and olive oil and everything else that would be needed to keep these Italians happy. You know, I can't imagine us going abroad and saying, let's take lorries full of our style of food. We just put up with whatever was local. But the Italians did it really, really well. So I grew up on the love of, in the early days, you know, learning about Lavazza coffee and good olive oil and Barilla pasta and all the things that, you know, normal English kids don't. And they had a pizzeria, and they taught the Nigerians there in the early 1970s how to make a good pizza, a good sourdough pizza with a great passata and all the rest of it. And I can still taste that tomato from that pizza from those moments next to the swimming pool. And what was interesting was they had a small British consultancy engineering firm called MRT. They were there just to probably keep the Italians on track. I don't know why they were there, but they were there. So all Italian, but two British, and they were ex-army, and they were from a different era. You know, they were from World War II. You know, they were in their 70s. You imagine they'd played their part in the British Armed Forces. In fact, one of them, his father, was involved and was responsible for the military police in the Punjab pre-Second World War. So he'd grown up, you know, with all of that. So they were terribly British. They were the wonderful things that we've sort of lost sight of. You know, some of the great, you know, some of the things that I nostalgically look back to and think, well, we might not have that anymore. They were great examples of Britain at its best. Now, I know Britain has its issues, but so they asked these British chaps, you know, two families, what they'd like to introduce, and they thought, well, you've brought the church. There's a church there. You've got the tennis club. You've got the supermarket, and of course you've got the social clubs and all the rest of it. So the Italians had solved everything, had done everything. I mean, it was like the arrival of the Roman legions of back in the day, and the Brits turned around and said, well, I think we need a film club. So there we are. We'll introduce the British Film Club. And so I remember watching these films and them saying, right, Ethel, close the curtains quickly, it's coming on. And they had these big reels and these, you know, crackly 5, 4, 3, and all in black and white. And I was like, that was so eccentric and so British, because of course the Italians had it all sorted in a very, you know, charming and a very, you know, beautiful and cosmopolitan way, but they didn't have the film club. And the film club was every Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, followed by drinks at 6.
Followed by Top Deck.
Oh, fantastic. I just thought that was so English, you know what I mean, from a different time.
So, what gave you the journey into hospitality? What was your route into it? Was it your first job?
Yeah, it was my first job. My first job was down in Devon, because we lived in Devon for a while, and there was a motel that needed a gasoline attendant. Now I didn't even know what gasoline. I mean, I just knew that they needed an attendant, so I went along, and it was to put the petrol into people's cars and check their oil and clean the windscreen. Within, I think I was 16, and within a shift, classic hospitality, the cook hadn't turned up. So I was there, and I remember it as it was yesterday. It was a motel, so I was there, and it was only 2 pumps. It was very, very small key, clearly. I mean, I was only 16. So it was very simple. You can only use 1 pump at a time or something. I had to do it myself, and they couldn't do it themselves. But I remember that next to it, they had the cafe, which was chips and burgers. And the man didn't turn up, and they said, "Oh, we need to get that going. Have you ever worked in a cafe before?" And I said, "Yeah." "Oh yes, oh yes, oh brilliant, brilliant. So would you like to go and would you like to help us?" I said, "Yes." I ended up for a number of shifts. I can't believe, for health and safety, I was running the gas, petrol, and making the burgers simultaneously for these customers. And I think to myself, I've never done a minute of health and safety training on anything to do with petroleum or food. And you think today what we go through to make sure that we're not going to get sued and that the welfare of our staff is our priority. Not even the customers, our priority. And I just think, God, how things have changed in terms of compliance. So that was my first job. That wasn't really why I was asked to. That's not why I entered the business of. I asked my mum, as you do, you know, your mum, you know, you ask your parents for advice, and this was some time before, and she just turned around and said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, I'd like to be a pilot. And she laughed and she said, "You're not going to become a pilot."
Is that why you've got the headset on just now? With the
Yeah, that's right.
fucked up clients, please sit down and hold on tight.
And I said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, you can't fix a plug, and I've shown you, and you're no good with a calculator." So on that basis, my future as an airline pilot had been swiftly dismantled and ejected. So then she said, "What else?" I said, "Well, I always liked Leroy, that fantastic dancer on Fame." And she looked at me, yeah, and she looked at me and thought, "Oh my God, it's getting worse." I was like, "Well, you are." So she said, "Well," she said, you just don't look the part, and I don't think you got it in you, and I don't think they'd want to."
So and at this point, did you have on the luminous, what was it, them sock things that they used to always wear, remember?
Yes, yeah, Jane Fonda, those wonderful leg warmers. So, you know, and you didn't have to be, you know, I mean, you could be as straight as an ironing board. You could still be a dancer, nothing wrong with that. Anyway, my gran was next to my mum at the time, and I remember her sniggling. The two of them were just dreadful. I mean, talked about giving you a sense of an inferiority, a sense of, you know, total uselessness. So I said, "All right, so what can I do?" She said, "You can make a good gin and tonic, and I think you should work in a hotel." And that was it. So when I went to my careers advisor, I said, "Don't even go there." I said, "It's been ordained, it's been decided, there's nothing to discuss, let's move on. What else could I get on with? Because there's a waste of time going on here." And that was it. Honestly, Callum, it was as simple as that. And we laugh, my mum and I, about it now, thinking, could I have done something else? You know, because hospitality is quite, it's a tough old business, and you sometimes think, what else could there have been? But that was it. I mean, simply put, there was nothing more to it, and then I did my course and got on with it.
So, and where did you go from there? How did your journey get to Lussmanns?
Well, I did my qualifications, my GCSEs and A levels, etc. And then I did a degree in Birmingham Poly, which I'm very proud of, because it turned into a university halfway through. But it's what polys are there for. Polytechnics are there for these sort of courses, and I think our industry needs to get us back to working within the ranks all the way through, and learning about the patina of what makes our industry so unique. Getting miles under your belt, and then along the way you can do your courses part-time and all the rest of it. I don't think doing a degree for 4 years did me any good at all. I remember I worked at a hotel where they had a night manager who was in his 60s then, and he'd worked his way up from a porter, so back in the day. So he was an older gentleman, and I could see that the only problem was that he was constantly being overlooked in regards to his future promotions, etc. And you'd have these young chaps who'd come in, young women who'd had a degree, had some sort of qualification. And I thought to myself then, well, what I need to do is get his experience and have a qualification. So I worked at university, and I had 3 jobs, sometimes 4 jobs on the go. I mean, I worked all the time. It was an experience to work so hard, but I knew that it would benefit. I think it benefits anybody. In fact, I think everybody, a bit like national service, should work in hospitality or something like that before they go out to the outside world. That the lessons that you will learn in society about people, about working together. If you can't join the armed forces and you're not into building, I think the hospitality trade is a wonderful safety net for so many people who don't know. And I think that we probably shouldn't require our students of tomorrow to become people who have degrees. And so I think it's a waste of our time. We should get them working, learning, earning some money, adding value, paying some tax, and then doing a part-time diploma and all the rest of it along the way. And that's that was my qualification into the industry. And then obviously I worked for a number of people. When I was in Birmingham, I'd worked for a whole list of companies. I got sacked from Ronnie Scott's in Birmingham when they had the Ronnie Scott set. I don't know why I upset the owner. I don't know why, because I was very supportive and helpful. I don't know what happened there. Something went wrong. And then I also worked for Duran Duran had a nightclub in Digbeth. So I worked there, which was a very, another interesting. And then, of course, I worked in a 5-star hotel and a Japanese restaurant. And then I worked for TGI Fridays when it was at its pomp. And everyone talked about TGI as being the arrival of Jesus Christ. I mean, it was like, this place is something special. Well, of course, in those days, TGI's was really unique because the training was excellent. Everyone had a good time. And the food was obviously instantly forgettable. But as a package, TGI's in 1995 was, best in class in many ways. Mm-hmm. So I did all that during my degree, and then I moved on and started some full-time jobs.
So who would be your food hero that really floats your boat? Floyd?
Yeah. I loved Floyd. I loved Floyd because he was honest, and he made mistakes, and he was charming. I can see why he had issues with women, because he was a very charismatic and he was a lovable rogue. I mean, he was, again, part of a different era where his approach on camera didn't seem to be sanitized. He was what he was. Mm-hmm. And I saw him on screen, and it was magnetic. I adored watching him. The interesting thing was, I started off in kitchens, and I then came out of kitchens very, very quickly. But I loved Floyd. I can't think of anybody else, really. I mean, I know that in those days there wasn't a lot on TV. There was Juliet Bravo, the Krypton Factor.
Bergerac.
and Bergerac, and everyone thought about Bergerac, this place called Jersey, which I actually worked in for a year and a half. But I loved Floyd, and I was so sad when he died, because he really was a hero of mine growing up. Yeah, very special. And today,
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, obviously, our mutual friend, the Big Cheese, Mr. Raymond Blanc, is a very unique, a lovable chap. Again, a brilliant leader in our industry, and somebody that we've got to know quite well over the years. And he's someone I love dearly. But there aren't many, in terms of, if I had a dinner tomorrow. I mean, I'd think about it. I have to come back to you, but those two names pop up as being instantly impressive characters. Apart from the odd person you've worked with who isn't a food hero but is a manager. There was an Irishman called John Christie, was my manager in TGI's, and loved him. In fact, so often you end up in a purely platonic way. You have a lot of time. You often you don't fall in love, but you adore the earth that some of these people walk on, and you do anything for them. You're like a father figure. So there were a couple of characters, I'm sure you have had, Callum, in your various worlds that you have been involved in, where you thought, this person is really special, and I'll do anything I'm asked of him or her. So they're not heroes in terms of public figures, but there are a few there which are very, very special.
yeah, I'd agree with you there. I think Floyd he's inspirational to a lot of people, and I'd done a podcast with Phil Vickery the other day, and Floyd was his inspiration, and it was the same. It was like back in the day, there wasn't all the charisma that everyone like there is on TV now. Blanky, Jesus, he gives everyone time of day, doesn't he? Anytime we've been at things together, he always makes great effort. If I take young chefs with me to things that Raymond's at, he always comes and introduces, and he'll always make an effort to speak to them. He is inspirational, especially when you listen to his journey of how he became what he is today. That wasn't a gift. That was his own gift. That was his journey of making his way to London and stopping and spending all his money in a cafe because he smelt the food, and that was him. He spent all his money then, So listening to their journeys there's never an idyllic situation where they've just been picked up and put into this wonderful arena and they've taken off. They've had to work hard to get to that point. But yeah, I think what you're saying there about it doesn't always have to be them big iconic figures that have given you inspiration. So, I had lots of bosses in the Navy over the years, and you soon realised who got the best out of you work-wise, like the guys that said, yeah, on you go, you're finished for the day, you've done everything. Or you've got the other guys that would be like making you clean, and I've just cleaned that, clean it again. And you'd be like, okay, but when the engine broke down in the middle of the night, you knew who you jumped out of bed for. You knew who you were going to go and do the graft for, fix the engine, so you learn a lot by that. I think if you sit back and you analyse, why did that guy get the best out of me? And you look at it, so you'll look at the TGI's manager guy and you'll think, he got the best out of me. There's lessons to be learned in that, why he got the best out of you. He wasn't just in your face all the time. He was managing to work with you, not looking down on top of you all the time.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think hospitality was always an opportunity for you, really, to they say lead from the front. I think hospitality, you have to learn, if you've been doing it for a long time and you grow a business, you have to learn, well, actually, I've got now to hold myself back and remind myself, you're not the captain on the field, you're the coach, and you've got to empower other people to lead from the front. Because leading from the front, if you're natural, and I love leading from the front, I remember, I was always first in and last down, saying, right, follow me, chaps, let's get this job done, however bad it was. But then you suddenly realise, as I've developed a career, and obviously Lussmanns has grown, I've suddenly realised I've got to now step back from that, and I've got to try and get the light shining on other individuals to blossom and make mistakes and get it wrong and still go forward in that way, because it's not my time anymore. You know, it's other people's opportunity now to, because that's one of the great parts of hospitality is that, you know, as leaders and as a captain of your particular, you know, your team, you can actually get stuck in and get involved, and you can win with your staff so quickly by illustrating that actually you do the same thing as they are, as they're required to do.
Yeah, that's something that's really kind of quite heavy in my forked up coaching, is to tell them that you've got to show them, not tell them what to do. You know, it's like a great example would be I would tell someone to go and clean a fridge, and they would tick it off and say, yeah, I've done it. And then I'd go and check it later, and to me, I'd think, he's not done it. But actually he had. He just had done it to his ability. I hadn't shown them how I wanted it done. So it's coaching. The wording you said there was right. You've got to coach them to do it properly, and actually coach them to flourish. Because if you if you coach them, they will flourish and become better. And you've got to allow them to make mistakes and let them understand that making the mistake is actually where the growth is. Because you've got to make the mistakes to learn and become better. Fact.
Yes, and I have also learned from making so many mistakes that with these individuals that you're working with, and of course I've now just forgotten my thread. Can you believe that? You know, I'm starting to forget things. I tell you, I'm trying very hard to pin it back and pull it in, and I can see the fish, but my hook is nowhere near the fish. So you know what? I have forgotten what I was going to say. Isn't that dreadful? So anyway, that gives you a lovely opportunity now to move on to a different subject.
Move on. So what got you into sustainability? Because that is a big part of your business.
Yes, and I would say that though sustainability underpins, you know, the commercial reality of the decisions we make, and is very much at the forefront of how I want to run the business, actually it's not at the forefront of how customers decide where they eat yet. You know, I've often said that, you know, and I've said this at the SRA, at various things, you know, you've got to make sure you're majoring on the cornerstones and the engine room of what makes a business successful. And it's the boring structural stuff. The cost is right. The product works. You know, your staff are charming 99.9% of the time. You're consistent in your delivery, in the way in which the whole business comes together. And the sustainability element, though it's quite fluffy and quite cool and quite on vogue or on trend, actually it isn't something that's going to pull people in. You know, it's something that might give you a unique selling point. But if you're inconsistent and very sustainable, they won't come back. If your staff are a bit funny or a bit narky, but you're very sustainable, they won't come back. And as we've seen, majority of businesses on the high street are not sustainable, have no ethics, but are very good at majoring on those cornerstones and communicating their product, and they're full. So, you know, selling hominy pie and having the tea towel across your shoulder and trying to run around, like Basil, you know, in Fawlty Towers, it's all great, and we love all of that. But in essence, the business will fail. I suppose I learnt that from day one. And I suppose in regards to where the ethics come from, that comes from my mum, 100%. I mean, you know, I obviously cooked at home and I learnt a lot, but it was less about being, you know, at my mum's, you know, apron strings, as often chefs and restaurateurs talk about. It was more about that my mum in the 70s taught me about compassion in world farming, and I suppose taught me about the essence and importance and the spirit of, if you're going to eat meat, make sure that meat, there is an understanding of where it's come from, and the meat, you know, the animal has had a life. And of course, compassion world farming is all about transparency. You know, it's all about the fact that there's no cruelty involved. And of course, Soil Association Organic goes on to say there's no antibiotics, there's no steroids, there's no hormones. They have to make sure that, you know, the way in which it's managed and farmed is correctly, stock densities are less, etc., etc., etc. So when I set up Lussmanns after working for, 12 years, 13 years elsewhere, it was the engine room what was going on in my head. But in essence, I realised immediately that if I make it my be-all and end-all, then yes, I'll be the artisan, but I'll be the dead artisan. It will never get over the line. And I think, my business partner, Luke Johnson said many years ago in an article, and I've always used this because I think it's a very good point, you know, because sustainability is a word that we use, all of us, and it means 100% of nothing to many and a huge amount of everything to others. How do you distinguish? How do you decipher? What does it mean? You know, it's very unclear. It's a very ambiguous and grey term that can mean everything. And as you know, because you are, like I am, you know, at the vanguard, pioneering, and have been for many, many years, there are many people that say things which are absolute codswallop in regards to ethical standing, their sustainable approach. And you just think, you know what, that's not correct. But in regards to business and starting from the early days, I realised that, you know, as he said, Luke, he said, better half the artisan than the dead artisan. And that has remained in my head, in that, you know, so many businesses have set up and try to do the best thing. But you know what? The most sustainable thing you can do, I think, is to employ staff. And they can pay taxes, and essentially we can live in a better world and vote in, you know, better people. And then from that, you can then distill down and say, right, what's next? So we shouldn't worry about being in business, because quite often ethics and sustainability and that world of everything that's green and brown, and when I grew up, you know, being business is a bad thing. Actually, it's the best thing, because it drives us to make better decisions. And being competitive gives essentially the consumer a far better offering. So on that basis, sustainability was part of what we did. I used to drive down on my motorcycle. Not only Jamie Oliver did this, we all did it, you know. I had a moped, used to drive down, drive, is that right? Yeah, on my moped, go down at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning to Smithfields and to fish. I used to pick up the fish, pick up all the meat. And I often used to laugh that if there was an accident, and don't ask me about refrigeration on the motorcycle with that meat. All right, it was a long time ago. But I always thought, if there's an accident, they won't know what bits of the sausage, what bits of me, it'd be carnage everywhere. I just thought, I can't afford to have an accident. And this little moped had about 100 kilos of sausage and food and me on top. Imagine, it's like something out of a Beano advert. It was, you know, it was chaos. Anyway, we moved on from that. But immediately that we started Lussmanns, I was looking for the provenance of ethics in farming and making sure that the meat we put on the table was British and was compassionate in its rearing, was outdoor reared, and was organic where possible. But, you know, you have to remind yourself, you want to make something which is egalitarian and supportive of a wide audience. There's nothing worse or more boring than having a community that are you know, very wealthy and buy food because it's a you know, it's like a fashion tag. You know, they buy it because they can afford to, and that's it. You want to, like in France with the bio tag and the organic tag, it's about, you know, it's there or thereabouts in terms of pricing for normal French produce in France. It's a totally different way of doing things. Whereas in England, food has been so sexualized in regards to the way we did the design, the packaging, the way it's communicated and advertised.
Can I just stop you? You just said England.
Did I say England?
You're Mr. British. Hey, gee whiz, I've been waiting 43 minutes for that.
Well, you know, I mean, Scotland's only got 5 million and there's 70 million in the British Isles. So, yeah, so I appreciate, when I said England, I meant, you know, the British Isles. So, yeah, so the ethics came from what I felt I'd been taught by my mum in terms of, if we're going to eat meat, make sure it's good meat, but don't charge the premium that comes with it. And that was always the premise of, can we create a business that actually isn't going out there? And it was very tough, because if you're creating a tuna niçoise, for example, you know, which is obviously not meat, it's fish, and you're doing an MSC piece of tuna, you know as I do, that MSC product, you know, there's chain of custody involved. You're paying for a passport that's, you know, a number of £1,000s a year. Then you're paying for the fish that's MSC certified, which is again 10% per fish more expensive. But you can't charge more than the high street casual brands are for that niçoise, for example. So you say, so this is a very tough experiment. And 21 years down the line, it isn't an experiment anymore, because people are now starting to ask questions. And 21 years ago, people weren't asking questions. And if they did, they generally probably didn't go out. You know, they were very insistent on, you know, eating a certain way. And if restaurants, which generally restaurants didn't do what they expected, they just wouldn't eat out. And in fact, even now, the general public takes the view that whatever ethics that we store at home in terms of what we buy, how we buy it, and the importance of buying something which is appropriate, understandably, we go out and we shelve all those ethics. We substitute it for, we're having a night out. We're going to enjoy having dinner with our partner or someone else's partner. It doesn't really matter, as long as someone pays the bill. But the point is that you don't want the customer to be there, you know, with your Bible saying, you should be eating this or you shouldn't be doing that, because hospitality is not about being bombastic and being over the top. It's about saying quietly, it's there if you're interested. And actually, you and I are in agreement here, you know, that it should just be the underpinning of all our businesses in hospitality. And you'll feel this with fish and chips. Everyone should do what you do because you're a market leader and, you know, you've been pioneering this approach. And there are, I mean, where I live, there's one fish and chip shop that does does what you do. I don't know how good their fish and chips are, you know, in England, in this particular town, compared to yours, Callum, up there in Stonehaven, on the near Aberdeen, on the east coast of Scotland. But I know that your ethics and your philosophy and what you know, believe to be correct, it's not about believing it. It is correct. It is the right way, and it should be almost everyone should just get on and do it as a minimum standard. And I suppose that's why we do it, because we believe that, you know, when we move on from this world, we'll say, well, we did the right thing, and maybe we made a little bit less as a result of it. Well, no, we definitely make less, but it's the right thing. And some of our customers will search us out for that reason. But the main thing is you've got to make people feel hospitable, you know, have it looked after in what you do.
100%. You're right what you're saying. Like I've always said, if there was two shops next to each other serving great fish and chips, great service, everything was packaged the same, but one was using MSC or sustainable produce and one wasn't, the customer, the ones that believe in sustainability, are only going to come to you. The people that don't care about sustainability can go to both. So actually you alienate yourself by not doing the right thing. It doesn't, you know, you're not open to everyone, but the hardest thing is the cost. The cost of being sustainable is colossal, but you've got to kind of make that not the kingpin. It's got to be the under part of what you're doing. One of the big things with sustainability, it's hard enough to get great produce and get great sustainable produce, but during COVID, you know, obviously it was hard enough getting any produce, let alone sustainable. Like chicken was a prime example. You know, you couldn't get red tractor chicken because all of a sudden the price, it became unjustifiable. All of a sudden you'd be saying, right, okay, I'm going to be charging you £20 for a portion of chicken fillets. No one in the right mind is going to pay £20 for a portion of chicken fillets. You know, so there has to, that it can't be the forefront of what you do, because you would not have a business, and that is not sustainable. Fact.
Yes, and I think you and I have often said this with the Sustainable Restaurant Association we're both members of, which is the only, from what I understand, global kite mark that helps measure and demonstrate how you can be sustainable, or at least it used to be. You know, the argument there was always, just remember, you've got to be in business, and being in business for any business is a tough ask. Because unless you've invented something which is extremely unique and unusual, which I haven't, what you're doing is you're trying to create something that actually has been done already by millions of different traders. So therefore, on that basis, how do you make it different? Well, it isn't the sustainability tag that makes you different. You know, it's a lovely philosophy, ideal concept. You know, it's a way of thinking which a small community which will buy into. But as you rightfully say, you know, if the business it doesn't make the right business decisions and isn't commercially tight, and believe me, after 21 years of doing Lussmanns, I have made some horrendous mistakes. I've learned so much because I'm not a finance person. Clearly, I didn't do accounting. Maths was never my best subject. I didn't go and do a business school, business degree. So you learn at the sharp end, because you make a decision, and 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 days or 3 years later, you suddenly realise, oh my God, I got that wrong. And you have to be your sharpest critic, because if you're not, especially in the world that we work in now, that things are moving quite quickly, on various fronts, and you find yourself asking, do I have to pivot again? I mean, talk about dancing. You are having to commercially dance to different tunes simultaneously, rather than saying, is it not enough that we've sourced the food, cooked the food, and put it on the table, and we serve it with a smile? Is that not enough? No, that's not enough anymore.
No.
So it is. You need a young, and passionate, drive, which is full of resilience and resolve to keep on going. And there comes a time, I suppose, that you probably say, well, I've had enough. I need to hand it over to somebody who has those ingredients in abundance.
So that's a good one. Go on for our next question then. What's been your biggest trip, your biggest fail that you've learned the most from?
Sorry, the sun's in my eyes. Okay, I've had a few. I was working in a kitchen because I'm not a chef. Nick, who is our group head chef, is a wonderful chap who I've worked with, and you've met him for many years. But I started off the coffee shop cafe in North London between Holland Park and Kensal Rise. So that's wonderful British problem, London problem, of very rich and very poor nestled between one another. And I worked there, and I was working with my sister. We had an argument. She now lives in Barcelona, and we do get on, but it didn't work with me and my sister after about 3 months, so she left. And I was the cook. I had never been taught to be a chef. I cooked at home. But I wanted to be the cook because I wanted to make sure that I was in control of what was going on. So I didn't want some snivelly chef to say, oh, I'm not earning enough, I'm not going to come in tonight. And I was like, I can't, the risk there is just, I can't be doing with it. So when we got to Hertford, which was our first restaurant outside London, I was in the kitchen. And I think I was dealing with the bank manager at the same time with one of those, when the leads came out that you could talk to somebody on a lead, and you felt as though you were out of Wall Street or something. So I had this lead hanging down from my ear, and I might have been wearing flip-flops, and there was I in the kitchen trying to cook, and I was giving somebody, a review on, I was giving some waiter a review on how they should maybe carry the tray and talk to the customers at the same time as asking for a coffee. So basically I was doing everything. And this customer came over and spoke to the manager, who happened to be my partner at the time and still is. And they said, we've had a lovely meal. So I was chopping something. I thought, yeah, that's me. I could, yeah. And they said, and we love the design. And I was like, yeah, that's my design. That's me. Thank you. And they said, and we love the ethos and what you're all about. And I was like, yeah. I'm like, you know what? That's 3 out of 3 so far. That's me. Thank you very much. And then he turned around and he looked at me and he said, but that person in the kitchen is bleep, 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 bleep. And I would not have them in my employment ever. And at that point, my knife stopped. And I was like, and he was talking about me. And that was a pivotal moment. I suddenly realised, you're right, I'm a total dick. I'm an absolute plonker, and it takes these moments sometimes for you to realise. So I asked a good friend of mine who was a customer in a different business I ran, who became a shareholder, Dick, I said, can you do a management survey on how this business is run? And he said, I'll do a survey. Whether the word business can be used in the same sentence, I don't know. But and he was a high-ranking a director for NatWest back in the day. So he knew his stuff, absolute expert, and then worked for RBS, your friends, the Royal Bank of Scotland for many years when RBS bought NatWest. So he did his survey, and he then presented me with the facts, which was more of the same. You're loved and hated in equal measure. And I was like, and when he gave it to me, I sat there and I went home after the meeting and I was sick. I was physically sick and I went straight to bed. I couldn't believe, I was in shock. I honestly, and I've never, well fed, just get on with it. Get your job done, crack on, let's move on. Never had much time for anything. And he said, well, you did ask me and I have given it to you to, full on as you asked. And I've always been, and I'm sure you're the same, shine a light on the darkest corner. Let's find out what the issue is and let's face it on. Well, he did it on me. And it was a terrible review. I mean, it was horrific. And the next day I came back and said, right, I need to change. So I was probably what you'd have called the Michelin star of paninis. You know, I was the sort of guy that would throw ramekins across the kitchen because I just couldn't cope with the fact that I was sort of trying to do everything and doing everything really badly. So I learned, you know, and I forget even what the question was, but I just remember that I was terribly incompetent at this part of the business. And I was a massive thorn in the backside of the growth. And worse still, everything that hospitality is all about. And it's funny, I was talking about last night with somebody. We talk about hospitality, looking after our staff and our customers. But actually, and when I came from hospitality in the early days, it was the dark days of, you know, abuse, discrimination, and all the rest. That means our time's up. You need the room back. I came. The light's going off in 3 minutes.
Yeah, pretty much.
We came from a very, very difficult time. And I suddenly realised I was once again, you know, the conveyor belt of bringing the past into the present. And Raymond Blanc speaks about making sure we nurture, we value, we reassure, we create, you know, a talent by, you know, giving these opportunities to our youngsters in the business and letting them flourish in what should be a business where they're well paid. You don't work all the hours God gives. Actually, it's an industry to be proud of. And I suddenly realised I was doing the opposite. I was a nightmare. And that was really one of the biggest moments in my life. I suddenly realised I need to change. You can't change your character fully, but I need to change what I'm doing because it is the most harmful thing in this business is actually me. And I think quite often independent businesses suffer from that because individuals don't often have the time or the mentoring or the coaching to realise you're actually driving the very people that are supporting you and on that journey with you away from what you're doing, which could be a really good idea, but you're destroying it. So there we go.
I think that's a real good value tip there, to be honest. Like I was a Führer. I came out of the Navy, so militarised. My staff called me the Führer. You know, youngsters now won't even know what the Führer is, but you know that's what I was like. And folks said to me, if you tame it down by half, you're still going to be strict.
You'll still be the Führer, right?
But it's true, you know. And how are folk going to flourish when they don't feel they can? You know, and you had to learn to trust, step away from the vehicle. You can't be the one cooking all the time, otherwise you'll be in a grave pretty quickly, or you'll have no business. Fact.
Yes,
so what bit of advice would you give a young version of yourself if you could now?
What advice? I don't know really yet. I mean, I haven't thought about it. I think there are a few ingredients you need to make sure you've got in your armoury, you know, and they're usual things. You know, you've got to have resolve and resilience to pick yourself up and pick yourself up and pick yourself up because there's no end to being pushed down. You know, that will never stop. And I think, you know, COVID was a good example of who has resilience, who has resolve, who has a capacity to, you know, take on the fight and better themselves and not allow what's going on to stop them. I think that's important. I think what's also important is having a passion for what you're doing. Because the resolve and resilience will only take you so far, but if you don't believe in the concept, the product, the business, the fraternity, the community, and all the rest of it, then what the hell are you doing? So passion is important. I think having some knowledge. You know, how many people set up a fish and chip shop, open a restaurant, open a bar, you know, 90% plus close every year, and it's embarrassing. It's like, well, you know what? Why don't you go and work in the industry? I wouldn't decide to become, you know, a chemist tomorrow or run a newspaper shop or, you know, become a printer until I'd worked in that industry. So have some industrial awareness. I suppose in the end, it's just, is you know, you have to appreciate there are people around you. You know, you know, unless you are a one-man band, and there are some industries or some professions that require only one person and nobody else. You know, maybe if you're a writer. But hospitality is all about a team. And all for one and one for all. You know, I learned that at school, you know, and I learned that in sport, and I forgot about it in industry in the early days because I was overwhelmed by what was going on around me for many years. And I must have upset so many people, staff, you know, especially. And I realized today, look after your staff, you know. And as you said earlier, if they're this son, God, it's like if they're aware of what's required of them or what's asked of them, and they've gone through some training, I think 99% of the skirmishes and the issues and the industrial relations that, you know, sometimes pop up as being issues within the business wouldn't be there. You know, something I've learned so much is it written down? Is there a principle? Is there a policy? You know, is there an operations manual? Have that person then been trained? If they've been trained and it's written down, it's highly unlikely that they will get it wrong. And if they do, maybe you've employed the wrong person. So bringing it back to your question, I don't know what advice I'd give apart from have those ingredients in your armory and be ready for the fight. Because, you know, Callum, it's a tough business. And I think all business is tough until you say, you know what, I've done my job now and I'm prepared to retire.
Yeah. Do you read books, do you?
I don't read enough.
So, like, I've got heavily into Audible books this past few years. So, being dyslexic, reading was like something that never interested me. But Audible books has given me the opportunity. Jesus, I've learned so much. Just, you know, you don't realise how much spare time that you can stick your headphones on and listen to something. Do you have any books that you would recommend the listeners to listen to, that, whether it's chefing or whether it's just development books or just anything?
I'm looking around for a book.
Playboy doesn't count.
Oh, do I have a book? All the books here are the Good Food Guide.
Just so happens you're in it.
Yeah, well, I was in it every year until a couple of years ago. I don't know what happened. Off the top of my head, you've caught me off there. Clearly, I don't read enough. I read bits here and there. I read around the subject. That's what I do think, and that goes for the politics of the day as well. You know, understood. There is, and I think, you know, the old saying of you don't really understand what's going on until you've marched in the shoes of the situation, and then you do it on both sides, and you suddenly realise, right, okay, now I understand what's going on, and that's very much the case in our business. It is understand what's going on, not from on high. And the beauty is we've both worked our way up, so we understand inherently what's going on. But I'm afraid to say I don't have a book for you, apart from the Bible.
Which you've read many a time.
Read the Bible.
Okay then, so where can my listeners find you if they want to come and visit you, socially or business-wise?
Well, we've got a website, which is lussmanns.com, Luss for sugar, Mann, S on the end. We are working on a sixth restaurant. It'll be opening, I'm signing this week, so I daren't say anything until I've signed. But that'll be open in the spring of 2024. Lussmanns at the moment are south of the border, the Scottish border, that is. In fact, they're south of Birmingham. they're very, very south. So we're in, you know, Hertford and St Albans, Hitchin, Berkhamsted and Harpenden. So they're all very different. I think you came and ate with us in St Albans once upon a time.
Did? Twice?
Back in the day. Twice you've been there?
I think it was. I was there. I took my cousin.
So that's where we are, and we're 21 years old, and next year's a very exciting year because we're going to be releasing, before Christmas, releasing our very own gin and our own beer. And then after Christmas, in February, we'll be releasing our own recipe book, and to celebrate 21 years. And, you know, there'll be some tea towels The tea towel cost came back from the printers, and I said, at these prices, we're going to have to charge 15 quid for a tea towel. I said, no one buys a tea towel for 15 quid.
Do you get someone to use it as well for that price?
Oh, my Lord. I said, Christ, what planet are we on? I said, tea towel is meant to be, you can buy tea towels free for a fiver. You know what I mean? I mean, it's ridiculous. So the tea towels are on hold at the moment. We need to work on another supplier. And yeah, organic cotton and everything else. But I almost had a heart attack when I found out what the price of these things were. So yes, we've got some nice goodies because we have a very strong and supportive community of customers, as you have, over 20 years. And I didn't really learn about them until I went out during the COVID. I used to drive out and do the deliveries and stuff. I suddenly met customers who were supporters of Lussmanns. Because, you know, in this business, you always deal with the negatives. You never realise that 97% of our customers enjoy what we do and support us and recommend us. But we don't. We focus on that 3%, which is probably, we should never forget the 97%, because that gives us a real sense of you're doing all right, you know, and the staff are doing a great job. You know, and that's one thing I also learned, which was take things in balance rather than focus only on the bad stuff. No, appreciate the bad stuff, but notice the good stuff. So yeah, so 2021 with that will be the year we do that. And Callum, being I will organise one day for you to have your very own Lussmanns apron that you can wear with pride north of the border, up in not quite in the Highlands, but anyway, there up in Stonehaven, and you can take a photograph of your many followers and say, "Can you see what's on my chest here?" This English brand called Lussmanns.
Right. Thank you very much, my friend. It has been really great to listen to your story, even if you didn't know what half the questions were and you just made them up anyway yourself. But I really appreciate it and can't wait to come and visit you again shortly and hopefully into your new restaurant. Cheers, my friend.
Thanks, Callum. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I'm not used to being asked all these questions. I usually are asking questions of other people, so was most appreciated. Speak soon.
Thanks. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.